The world moved in frames, not seconds. Tracers stitched the air in slow arcs, orange comets ripping through the night. The valley burned, fuel, rubber, and paint feeding a rolling wave of black smoke that crawled along the canyon walls and smeared the stars from the sky. Chief Petty Officer Rourke slammed his shoulder into the side of the disabled MRAP, boots sliding in gravel, slicked with oil. The truck sat at an angle in the road, nose buried in a shallow crater, armor peeled back like a crush can. Flames licked at the undercarriage. "Med!" he shouted, but his voice vanished under the roar of a heavy machine gun. A PCAM on the ridge hammered in merciless bursts, rounds chewing the rocks around them. Stone chips stung his face. One cracked against the plate on his chest with a flat, ugly whack. He smelled cordite and the coppery tang of blood under the stench of burning diesel. "Got you, Chief." A young medic, Petty Officer Hughes, slid beside him on his knees, one hand still clamped on the bleeding neck of the comms operator he'd been treating. The other pressed a bandage tighter. The comms guy, Singh, blinked up at Rourke through a mask of dust and sweat. The radio mounted on his ruined plate carrier was a melted, twisted brick. Its antenna dangled by some stubborn wire, still smoking. Rourke's own headset hissed in his ear. Static. Occasional pops. The clear, crisp voices from the forward base, call signs, grids, the steady anchor of higher command, were gone, swallowed by a constant, sour buzz. "Black on long range," Singh rasped, trying to push himself up. Hughes forced it back down. Rourke tapped the side of his headset, checked the alternate handset clipped to his chest. All the same, hiss, a faint oscillating whine. Jamming. Perfect, saturating, merciless. "Short range," he demanded. "Garbage," Singh coughed. "They're sitting on us." Another burst from the ridge. Rounds walked across the valley floor, sparks jumping from the twisted metal of the lead vehicle up ahead, flipped sideways, blocking the road like a barricade. Beyond it, fire. Beyond that, only darkness. Overhead, something buzzed thin and wasp-like. Rourke looked up through the gray haze. A small quadcopter circled above the battlefield, stuttering in the turbulence from rising heat. Its tiny navigation lights were taped over, but he could see its silhouette passing over the fire, the glint of a camera gimbal. "Great," Hughes muttered. "They've got eyes on us, too." The drone hovered, adjusted, and drifted slightly, correcting for the shifting smoke. Somewhere, someone was watching them on a grainy feed, calling corrections, orchestrating the kill. Rourke snapped his rifle to his shoulder and put his dot on the little shape, but it was too high, too small, and his breathing too fast. He forced himself back behind the MRAP as a shower of incoming rounds tore into the ground where his head had been a half-second ago. "Don't bother," he growled, more to himself than anyone. Drone's not the main problem. The PKM was. Every time anyone moved beyond cover, the gun spoke, hard and rhythmic. It hugged a high notch in the rock, invisible through the smoke, but perfectly placed to rake the convoy. Each burst overlapped with precise arcs of fire from other, smaller weapons along the cliff. Crossfire. Kill zone geometry executed like a textbook. A mortar round whistled in, the sound cutting through everything like a falling scream. "Down!" someone shouted. Maybe Rourke, maybe Hughes, maybe all of them. The blast hit just off their flank up on the wadi wall. The impact was a punch from the sky. The ground kicked up, flipping loose rocks and dirt over them. A tangent shock wave slammed into Rourke's ribs, stealing his breath. The wadi wall shuddered and then slumped, spilling a curtain of earth and dust into the road and over their heads. The world blinked into white-gray nothing. Rourke coughed, lungs filling with fine grit. Hughes swore, voice muffled. Somewhere, someone screamed for a second and then cut off mid-sound. The dust turned the air into a solid thing, visibility collapsing to arm's length. Shadows moved like ghosts, close enough to touch, impossible to identify. Through the gray blizzard, another burst of PKM fire roared, but the tracers were weirdly soft, halos floating through the chalky air. A bullet snapped against the MRAP's armor inches from Rourke's face, leaving a fresh gouge. "We can't stay here," Hughes said, coughing hard. "We're getting walked in." "We move, we get cut down," Rourke answered. He looked down at the magazine in his rifle, half spent. Behind the MRAP, two more SEALs were crouched, each counting their own ammo with quick, efficient motions. Not panic, just math. "Where's our bird?" someone asked from behind them, voice tight. "Waved off," Rourke said. "Ground fire's too heavy. We're on our own." There it was, said aloud. It made the valley feel even smaller. He pressed a hand to his side, feeling the sticky warmth soaking through his combat shirt. Shrapnel had sliced a groove along his ribs at some point. He hadn't noticed in the chaos. It throbbed now, each heartbeat a dull ache. The bleeding wasn't catastrophic. Not yet. The hiss in his headset went on and on. "Mission's over," he said quietly, more to the rocks than to his men. "We hold here and make them pay." It wasn't defeat. Not exactly. Just acceptance of a different kind of mission. Not extraction, not objective capture, but denial. Deny the enemy bodies alive. Deny them gear intact. Deny them whatever this carefully constructed trap was designed to serve. Hughes swallowed, nodding once, jaw tight. Singh closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them again, calmer. The others shifted, accepting the line in the sand that had just been drawn. The PKM opened up again. It roared, then choked, then a single, crisp crack cut through the night. It was clean and distant, not the rattling buzz of automatic fire, not the dull thump of mortars. A rifle shot, high caliber, disciplined, punching through the chaos like a metronome in a drum circle. The PKM stopped mid-burst. For an instant, the echoes of its last rounds bounced off the canyon walls as if the gun were still firing. Then there was only the hiss of burning fuel, the crackle of fire, and the fading whine of ricochets. What the Hughes started. A fraction of a second later, another crack, almost delicate compared to the violence of the battle. The buzzing overhead changed pitch. Rourke looked up in time to see the quadcopter stagger in the sky, one rotor shearing off, the others spinning wildly. The drone corkscrewed down, hit a rock, and exploded into plastic shards and twisted metal. The valley paused. Not fully, not truly. Small arms still barked from the ridges. Somewhere, a single shooter fired unsuppressed bursts down into the wrecked convoy. But the PKM, the engine of the kill zone, was silent. The drone was gone. The mortar crew, perhaps stunned by the sudden shift, held their fire for a few precious seconds. Rourke used those seconds. "Eyes up," he shouted, scanning the ridge line through the thinning dust. Their sniper was supposed to be with them. In the convoy, Vega had climbed into one of the rear vehicles earlier, rifle cradled, gear wedged in beside everyone else's. She wasn't on the ridge. She couldn't be. Nobody could have. He squinted through the wandering smoke, pulse beating in his ears. On the opposite side of the valley, just beyond the rolling curtain of gray, a shape emerged. At first, it was just a darker shadow in the dark. Then the rising flames from the lead truck flared, sending a wave of light across the rock face, and the shadow became a silhouette. A lone figure stood on a narrow shelf of stone, outlined in orange and red like a cutout pinned against the night. Compact, still, rifle pressed snug into a shoulder. The barrel was long and lean, a suppressor's outline showing faintly against the sky. The figure didn't move like someone who'd stumbled there by accident. There was no wildness, no frantic scrambling. She stood with the loose, grounded poise of someone on a range, not in a furnace. Rourke saw the slight tilt of a helmet, the line of a cheek illuminated by firelight. The gear she wore wasn't standard issue neat. It was layered, mismatched, patched in places. A small strip of tape on her stock caught the light, and for a second he thought he saw a hand-scribbled word on it before the smoke rolled back in and swallowed it. She worked the bolt, the motion smooth and economical. Who the hell is that? Hughes breathed. Rourke already knew, or maybe he only believed enough to make it real. The silhouette shifted. The rifle tilted, searching for its next target. Below her, flashes on the ridge winked out, one after another, as if a giant were pinching candles between thumb and forefinger. The SEALs, huddled behind wreckage and rock, stared upward in the strangled half-light. Some blinked, confused. Their sniper was supposed to be down here, pinned with them, another body they had to protect. No one could explain how she was up there instead, behind and above the entire kill box, turning the geometry on its head. Is that? Hughes started. Rourke didn't let him finish. Vega, he said, barely audible and not entirely sure he was right. Has to be. On the ridge, the figure took another shot. The sound came a heartbeat later, rolling down the rocks like distant thunder. In the brief flash of recoil, the burning convoy lit her face again. Sharp features, smeared camouflage, eyes that looked like they'd seen this valley before it happened. Steady, detached, tracking, choosing, executing. Smoke curled around her legs like a living thing. The rest of the world roared and burned and bled. But up there, she was an island of control, each shot a thin line connecting chaos to something like hope. Rourke felt his perception tilt like someone had grabbed the whole battlefield and rotated it a few degrees. Their last stand wasn't suddenly safe. The mission wasn't magically fixed, but something fundamental had changed. Maybe the mission wasn't over after all. The next incoming volley from the enemy was thinner, less certain. A gap opened in the storm. Small but real. Rourke dragged his sleeve across his face, clearing grit from his eyes. He looked up at the ridge one more time, committing that silhouette to memory, branding it next to every bad decision and close call that had ever marked him. Hours earlier, he remembered, nobody had wanted her on this mission. The thought sliced across his mind like its own gunshot. The scream of a new mortar round cut through the valley, and the moment shattered. He ducked back as the round hit further away this time, off rhythm, like the hand guiding it had lost its confidence. Darkness flickered, and the story jerked backward, to the heat of midday, to a canvas-walled tent and a map on a plywood table, to the moment everything started to go wrong for reasons almost no one wanted to hear. The mission nobody took seriously. The air inside the briefing tent tasted of dust, coffee, and marker fumes. A printed satellite image of the valley lay tacked to the plywood table, its grayscale contours traced over with red and blue grease pencil lines. Someone had doodled a tiny smiley face in the corner near the forward operating base, the only spot on the map that meant relative safety. Lieutenant Kramer, the briefing officer, tapped the valley with the capped end of his marker. Objectives here, he said. Call sign rail post. Single-story relay hut, small antenna mast. According to our local sources, it's used to pass smuggled messages between cells. They're not expecting anything more than a harassment raid. We go in at night, knock it over, grab drives if there are any, blow the rest, and get out. He nodded to the small sketch of the valley road, a single winding thread cutting between harsh, steep walls. And out in 30, he added. Chairs creaked as the SEALs leaned back. The mood in the tent was casually focused. Heads nodded. Pens scribbled notes, more out of habit than concern. At the far end of the table, Ensign Vega sat with her elbows close to her sides, notebook open, pen still. A few strands of dark hair had slipped out from her bun and clung to her temple in the tent's residual heat. Her eyes, a cool gray-green, tracked over the map with slow precision. The terrain lines weren't just abstract curves to her. She saw how they rose, where they pinched, where shadows would pool when the sun dropped. Her gaze lingered on the narrowest section, a choke point 2/3 of the way in. Intel says probable enemy count, someone asked. 6 on site. Maybe a few more in the area, Kramer replied. Light weapons. Old AKs. Maybe a PKM if they're lucky. His tone suggested he didn't think they would be. Overkill, then, one of the operators said with a grin. Dragging a whole damn circus for a shack and a radio mast. Soft laughter rippled around the table. Better too much than not enough, Kramer said. But he said it like a line he was supposed to say, not one he believed. Anyway, Command wants a clean hit on this route. They think this relay's a key link in moving fighters south. We cut it, we slow them down. Vega lifted her pen, but didn't write yet. Sir, she said quietly, when Kramer paused. He glanced down the table at her. Yeah, Vega. Do we have a sequence of imagery over time? She asked. Not just the latest pull. I like to see how the road use has changed. There was a half-beat of silence, the kind that fell when someone asked something more technical than the room expected. Kramer shrugged. We've got 3 shots over the last few weeks. Analyst says roads low traffic, Mostly local trucks, one or two unknowns. What? Vega flipped to a different page in her notebook where she'd already sketched the valley from memory. In the last image, there are multiple tire tracks here. She tapped the neck of the valley. Heavy vehicles. Parallel ruts, not scattered. Looks like repeated use by something bigger than local pickups. One of the SEALs smirked. Sniper school now issues geology degrees too, he murmured to his buddy, just loud enough for Vega to hear. She didn't look up. Also, she went on, those sandbags by the hut's perimeter, she traced a line with her pen. They're too sharp in the last image. No erosion, no sagging. They're new. Whoever's there is reinforcing, not just camping. Or they finally figured out sandbags don't fill themselves, another operator offered. You know how lazy these guys can be. A few chuckles. Someone clicked a pen in an impatient rhythm. Kramer lifted one shoulder. Analysts flagged the same bags, but no heavy weapons signatures nearby. Could be they're expecting some local trouble. Could be nothing. Our human doesn't indicate anything more than usual in that valley. Vega frowned slightly, studying a faint shadow behind the small relay hut. It was barely there, a darker smear bleeding into the background slope. What's that? She asked. Kramer leaned in. What? She tapped the shadow. Here, behind the hut. He squinted. Rock outcrop. Maybe a tree. You know how these low-angle shots distort things. It's aligned, Vegas said. Same bearing as a taller mast would be if they massed it behind a structure. Could be a secondary antenna. Could be a giant statue. The same operator from before muttered. Could be a camel. Could be my ex-wife. Some of the team laughed. The tent felt a little smaller with each dismissive joke, each nudge at her seriousness. Vega considered saying more, then took a breath and let it out slowly. She shifted her pen to a fresh page. What about missing locals? She asked instead. Any pattern of disappearances near the valley? Families leaving villages, people not showing up for work, that sort of thing. The intel analyst, a civilian in a wrinkled collared shirt, sitting near the projector, looked up in mild surprise. We've got some displacement numbers, he said. Mostly folks moving toward the city. Economy's trash. No clear signs of forced displacement around that valley. What? Vega wrote down no pattern/displacement economic in neat script. Just checking, she said quietly. No one asked her why again. When the briefing broke, chairs scraped and the hum of easy conversation filled the tent. People stood, stretched, made dark jokes about the chow, about the heat, about the dust that invaded everything. A few slapped Vega's shoulder as they passed, the casual, affectionate kind of contact that said, we don't really listen to you, but you're one of us. Outside, the light hit like a wall. The sun hovered high, turning the forward base into a landscape of bleached plywood, steel, and tan canvas. Generators throbbed. A helicopter idled in the distance, rotors lazy for now. Vega stepped into a strip of shade beside a HESCO barrier and dropped to one knee by her rifle case. She popped the latches and opened the lid with a reverence that bordered on ritual. Her rifle lay in its foam cutout, long and lean, metal dulled by paint and dust. She ran her fingertips along the primary optic mounted above the receiver, pausing at a fine spider crack on its housing. A souvenir from a previous mission where a rock in gravity had nearly ruined her night. She frowned and tilted the scope, peering through it. The glass was still clear, the reticle crisp, but the crack bothered her. The idea of weakness, hiding there, waiting for the wrong impact at the wrong time. She reached into the case and pulled out a small, canted mini-optic, checking its battery, its mount. She bolted it on after that last mission, an insurance policy against exactly the kind of failure that kept her up at night. As she worked, her gaze drifted to the side of the case where an old patch lay tucked into the foam. Faded colors, frayed edges. A different unit, a different time, a different mountain range half a world away. She touched it lightly with her knuckles, not quite willing to pick it up. The ambush had been a high pass, years ago. Wrong intel, wrong route. A kill box they hadn't seen until it was too late. Her spotter, Ramirez, had gone down in the first burst. Their radios had died under a wave of jamming that felt eerily like the hiss she'd hear again tonight. The geometry of the map in the tent had nagged at her because of that day. Narrow valley, single entry, high walls, one road in, one road out. She didn't have to imagine what the enemy could do with that. She had seen it. "Hey, Vega," a voice called. She glanced up. Petty Officer Kyle, tall and broad-shouldered, leaned against the barrier with a grin. "You bringing that museum piece on our little babysitting mission?" "Rifle's fine," she said, checking the torque on the mounts with a small wrench. "Sniper school graduate, top of the class. And they've got you watching a shack." Kyle shook his head with faux sympathy. Tragic misuse of government resources. Another operator, Torres, joined them, flipping his helmet in his hands. "I heard she requested a whole separate hello just to fly her to the high ground like some sniper princess." Vega smiled faintly without looking up. "I requested Overwatch," she corrected, "because that's literally my job." "Relax, Vega," Torres said. "We're messing with you. It's a milk run. We'll be back before the coffee goes cold." "Milk runs kill you just as dead as real ones," she said, almost under her breath. If they heard, they didn't show it. On the hello ride-in, she took a seat near the rear ramp, rifle laid across her knees. The interior vibrated with the familiar righteous noise of the bird, the smell of hydraulic fluid and metal and sweat. A red light bathed the compartment, turning faces into mask-like profiles. The others bantered over the intercom, arguing about sports scores, about who snored loudest, about whose ruck always mysteriously got heavier when they weren't looking. The noise was comforting in its own way, like a song they'd all heard 1,000 times. Vega tuned it out, eyes on the small tablet in her hand. She flicked between terrain views, tracing the valley walls with her fingertip, noting ridges and spurs. She marked a narrow drainage cut on the east wall, a small, dark gash that just might, lead to a shelf overlooking the relay. She imagined herself there, prone behind a low ridge of rock, rifle settling into position. She could see the hut, the road, the likely positions of any machine guns. She could see angles, arcs, overlapping fields of fire that favored them, not the enemy. "Flight, this is Ghost 1, the pilot's voice came through the intercom, common board, picking up some interference on the net. Anybody else hearing that? Rourke, strapped in across from Vega, lifted his headset slightly, listening. A faint hiss tickled the edges of the comms channel. Nothing overtly hostile, just noise. Probably atmospherics, the pilot said a moment later. Storm off the coast. We'll be fine. Vega slid the tablet into her vest and looked at Rourke. "Sir," she said via intercom, tilting her helmet slightly toward the tablet before she put it away. "When we land at the LZ, recommend I break off and take high ground here." She nodded toward the imaginary point in the air where that drainage cut existed. "I can be in position before you drive into the valley." Rourke thumbed his push-to-talk. "We're not complicating this," he said over the net, his voice carrying to everyone. "We're sticking to the plan. Convoy in, hit the target, convoy out. No splits. No solo hikes. It's not a hike. It's Overwatch," Vega replied. "It's a choke point valley with no alternate exits. If they're waiting for us, we're driving into a tube. I don't like having all our guns in that tube." "We're not negotiating this in the back of the bird," Rourke said. His tone wasn't harsh, just final. "We got clean intel. Low threat. You stay with the convoy." She could have let it go. She almost did. But the image of that old patch in her case crept back in, and with it a faint recollection of another leader saying, "We're not going to overthink this." "Sir," she tried again, softer. "Just trust me. Something about that road." "Vega," he said, eyes steady on hers. "It's a babysitting mission. You'll get your long shots on something that actually needs them. For tonight, you ride with us." The red light in the hello flickered as they banked. The valley appeared ahead through the small porthole near the ramp, a dark slash in the desert, edges hardened by moonlight. The LZ was a flat patch of scrubland at the valley's mouth. The hello touched down in a heartbeat of flying dust and noise. The ramp dropped, and they poured out into the cold night, boots hitting dirt in practiced unison. Engines rumbled nearby as a line of MRAPs waited, hulking silhouettes with armored glass glinting faintly. Vega climbed into the second-to-last vehicle, wedging herself between rucks and ammo cans, rifle awkwardly angled, muzzle pointed up. As the convoy rolled toward the valley, the sky darkened. The last smear of sunset disappeared behind them. Headlights went off, and night vision goggles came down, the world shifting to shades of green and grain. Vega turned once in her seat and looked toward the valley walls, tracking a faint shadow of a drainage cut along the east side. An alternate route, a different story. Then the MRAP's door closed, sealing her into the steel box, and the convoy drove into the mouth of the place that would try to swallow them whole. She pressed her fingers briefly to the cracked housing of her optic and thought, not for the first time that day, that nobody ever took kill boxes seriously until they were standing in one. When the valley closed its teeth. By the time the convoy had clawed its way deep into the valley, the sky was a hard lid of stars overhead and nothing else. The canyon walls towered on either side, dark monoliths that seemed to lean inward as the road wound between them. NVGs washed everything in ghostly green, flattening distances, making the world feel both intimate and unreal. Inside the rear MRAP, Vega stood braced in the open hatch, upper body halfway out into the wind. Her rifle rested on the lip of the armor, barrel pointed downrange. She scanned ahead and to the sides, the familiar faint hum of her NVGs in her ears, the subtle distortion at the edges of her vision telling her where the lenses ended and the world began. The valley floor had been rocky at first, the road barely more than 2 ruts worn by years of passing vehicles. Now, though, something was different. She frowned, leaning forward. The texture had changed. The rocks gave way to a smoother surface, darker in the NVGs. The road looked groomed. She flipped her goggles up for a second and squinted with naked eyes. Moonlight spilled into the valley in thin slices where the walls dipped. In those shards of silver, she saw what had bothered her. The soil here was freshly compacted, the edges of the road pressed into clean lines instead of a regular scatter. Somebody had done work here. Recently. Driver, Vega said, keying her internal calm, voice low. You seeing this? The driver grunted. Seeing what? Road's changed. Looks graded. Like they've been prepping it. Might be. She never finished charge lane. The world exploded. The lead MRAP vanished in a blast of light and debris. One moment, it was a lumbering shape with a swinging antenna. The next, it was a spinning ball of flame and twisted metal. The IED went off underneath it, lifting the entire vehicle off the ground in a sickeningly slow arc before gravity pulled it sideways. It crashed onto its side, blocking the road completely, a burning wall of steel and fire. Contact! Someone shouted over the net. Before the echo of the blast finished bouncing off the canyon walls, a second detonation hit the rear of the convoy. The last vehicle erupted, wheels flung into the air, armor plate crumpling inward. The shockwave slammed into Vega's chest, even at her distance. The convoy was sealed in. First and last vehicles gone. The ones in the middle boxed and stunned. And the guns opened up. Machine gun fire poured in from both sides of the valley. Muzzles flashed along the cliff faces, small bursts and long streams, the tracers intersecting in deadly crosshatches. Hot rounds hammered the earth, the vehicles, the air itself. The MRAP under Vega lurched to a stop. The radio squawked, then went white noise as bullets ripped through the external antenna in a shower of sparks. Out, out, out. Rourke's voice cut through the chaos, at least on the internal net. Vega dropped back into the MRAP, hit the door release, and spilled onto the ground with the others. The air was suddenly alive with shards of rock, dust, and the distant screams of injured men. She sprinted to the nearest cover, a tangle of rocks beside the stalled vehicle, and threw herself down, rifle already searching for the longest, hardest sound in the chaos. There was the heavier, deeper roar of a PKM, firing long, confident bursts from somewhere high on the ridge to the east. The gun's beat dominated the fight, a metronome of death that pinned their movement down. Another sound joined it, the rhythmic thunk and whine of mortars. The first round fell long, then short, then right in line. Mortars adjusting off us, Vega snapped into her mic, switching to the platoon net. Every time we key a radio, They change. Her sentence dissolved into static. She yanked her PTT button again. This is Vegas 1. Only hiss answered. A constant, aggressive buzz that rode every attempt to transmit. Comms are jammed. Sing called from somewhere to her left, confirming what she already knew. They're sitting right on our frequency. Satlink's dead too. An IED blast shook the ground again, but this time it wasn't under a vehicle. It was a smaller charge, triggered on a rocky outcrop where 2 SEALs had tried to move. The explosion hurled them back, armor smeared with dust as they slammed into the ground. Rourke crawled toward a large boulder, waving others to him. "Anchor on me," he shouted. "Sectors. Push left and right to cover. Get those guns talking." Even without a clear command net, their training took over. Bodies moved in organized chaos, each man grabbing a sector, each weapon answering the incoming fire. The valley thundered as rifles and light machine guns spat back at the ridges. Vega set up behind a rock, finding a small groove that gave her a sliver of an angle on the east wall. She shouldered her rifle, peered through the scope, and the world fractured. A near miss, some chunk of angry metal, slammed into her optic housing with brutal, precise cruelty. The scope twisted sideways. The glass in her view went from clear to spiderwebbed in an instant. The reticle blurred, the crack refracting light into useless glints. Vega swore under her breath, flipping the rifle sideways to inspect the damage. The scope's outer casing bore a fresh gouge, deep enough to make her stomach clench. The glass itself, though, still mostly intact. Distorted but intact. "Vega," Rourke shouted. "You up?" "I'm up," she called back. "Optics compromised. Still usable for spotting. I've got backup." She rolled the rifle slightly, bringing the small, canted mini-optic into play. Its dot glowed steady and unbothered. Not perfect for long shots at extreme range. Better than nothing in a valley that wanted them dead. A SEAL near the center of their position fumbled with a small quadcopter, fingers shaking more from urgency than fear. He threw it into the air. Its rotors wind up, and it climbed a few meters before a single, precise burst from the ridge shattered it into a cloud of plastic and sparks. "They were ready for that, too," Vega muttered. The pattern was clear now, as awful as it was familiar. IEDs at the choke points. Machine guns in pre-sighted pits. Mortars bracketed to the valley. A signal jammer saturating their nets. Marksmen placed to kill their eyes in the sky. It wasn't a lucky ambush or a hastily thrown-together attack. It was a machine built for one purpose: swallow a force like there's whole. "Sax hit," someone yelled. Vega's stomach dropped. She turned in time to see Klein, their forward air controller, on the ground, one leg a mess of blood and torn cloth. His radio was dark, its screen cracked. Another SEAL knelt over him, tourniquet already biting into his thigh, face tight with focus. "Without Klein, we've got no air," Rourke said, kneeling beside them, hand pressed to his own bleeding side. "We're not getting fast movers in this canyon anyway. We're on our own." Vega looked past him, through the haze, toward the relay hut. It was smaller than it had looked on the SAT image. Just a concrete box with a metal door and a radio mast. But behind it, where she'd seen that faint shadow in the imagery, there was more. A larger truck squatted there, half camouflaged with netting and tarps. A thicker antenna rose from its bed, cables running from it to the hut. Figures moved around it, half pulling a gear, half aiming rifles up toward the ridges. The door of a reinforced shack beyond it caught her eye. Heavy, with extra plates welded on, guarded by 2 men with mismatched uniforms but similar, calm posture. This wasn't a simple relay. Someone had built something more deliberate here. Something that justified the level of effort they'd put into the trap. "Sir," Vega called to Rourke, pointing with the barrel of a rifle. "Look past the hut. That's not just a relay station. They've got a full antenna truck. Probably the jammer. And that shack, that's not a tool shed." Rourke followed her gesture, squinting through his goggles. "We're kind of busy not dying right now," he said, but there was a hint of reluctant agreement in his voice. Whatever they've got, they were damn sure we'd come drive right up to it. Mortars thumped again. The rounds walked closer. One slammed just behind their position, the blast wave flipping Vega onto her side. For a moment, the world was pure sound. Ears ringing, vision narrowed, everything distant. She pushed herself up, spitting dust. Her hands shook, but not from fear. From adrenaline, from the strain of holding so many inputs in her head at once. Angles. Trajectories. The way the enemy fire pinned them to this narrow strip of boulders like insects on a display board. "Stay down," Rourke barked, shoving Hughes back as the medic tried to move to another casualty. "They've got this whole place wired. Nobody breaks cover unless they have to." Vega's gaze flicked up the eastern wall. She could see it, dimly, even through NVGs and chaos and smoke. A narrow slash of darker stone where a drainage cut fed into the valley. It climbed jaggedly into the heights, disappearing into shadow. Higher up, with a wall flattened slightly, she thought she saw the faint line of a shelf. She pictured herself on it, rifle settled, angle of fire reversed. The kill box opening from the top instead of from the side. "Sir," she said, sliding toward Rourke behind the rock. "That drainage cut. East wall. I can climb it. Get above them. Take the guns, the mortars, the truck." Rourke stared at her like she'd suggested sprouting wings. "Under this fire?" he demanded. "You step out of this cover, you're a silhouette. They'll carve you up before you get 10 meters. If we stay here, the mortars finish the job," Vega shot back. "They've got us pre-sighted. They know we're stuck. Every time we transmit, they dial in closer. We've already lost the lead and trail vehicles. How many more rounds until one lands right on us?" His jaw clenched. He looked over his shoulder. Another burst of PKM fire raked across the rocks higher up, sending a cascade of stone chips rattling down. "We hold here," he said, voice colder. "We tighten up. We use what ammo we have left smart. We're not splitting forces. That's doctrine for a reason. Doctrine doesn't cover this," Vega pressed. "They built this valley for exactly what we're doing. Sitting, reacting, dying on their schedule. The only way out is to change the geometry. From inside the box, we're just..." A mortar landed close enough to suck the breath from her lungs. Earth and rock collapsed over her. For a brief, suffocating second, she was under it, weight pressing down, world gone to dark static. Her brain yanked her somewhere else. Another mountain, another explosion, Ramirez's hand going slack in hers as dirt rained down. She clawed upward, fingers finding air, then rock, then the rough fabric of someone's sleeve. Hands grabbed her, hauling her out. She emerged into the valley again, coughing, dust coating her teeth. Her heart pounded hard at her chest, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "They're doing it again," she said. "Same pattern. Same funnel. I've seen this. If we stay, we die. Maybe we kill a few more of them first, but we still die." Rourke looked at her, something shifting behind his eyes. He wasn't afraid to die. None of them were. But he was responsible for more than himself, and the weight of that pressed on him heavier than the shrapnel in his side. "This is suicidal," he said. "Not as suicidal as staying," Vega replied. "Give me one shot at changing the angle." Another mortar whooshed overhead. This one landed further away, past them, as if the crew had overshot in their eagerness. Rourke flinched, then wiped dust from his face with a rough swipe. He stared toward the drainage cut, then back at her. "Fine," he snapped. "You've got one shot. You take that cut. You get above them. You kill anything that has a bigger gun than we do." He jabbed a finger at her vest. "But you don't go Lone Ranger. You keep your radio on. If we call for you, you answer. If you go dark." "If I go dark, it means they found me first," she said. "At which point, you can adjust your expectations accordingly." He almost smiled at that, a tight, humorless twist. Then he leaned closer. "And Vega," he added quietly, "don't die trying to fix my mistake." It was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging that ignoring her earlier had cost them dearly. There'd be no time for more later. Not if she failed. She nodded once. Not planning on it. She switched her optic to the candid mini, checked the battery one more time, and started to strip her gear. She dropped everything she didn't absolutely need. Extra ammo, she couldn't carry up steep rock and still climb. Secondary gear. Even her plate carrier's side plates, she kept front and back. Enough to help if she took a glancing hit. Light enough to let her move. She kept the essentials. rifle, spare magazines in a small pack, a smoke grenade, a tourniquet, a slim handheld radio clipped high to her shoulder strap. Her world narrowed to those items and the line of the drainage cut she'd chosen. Rourke barked orders over the local net. On my mark, we light up the ridge. Full volume. We make them think we're planning another push. While they're busy, she moves. He looked at Vega again. No more words. No more questions. She nodded, exhaled, and settled into a crouch. 3, 2, 1. Now, the SEALs unleashed hell. Every weapon that still worked spat fire at the ridges. Grenades arced up to burst against rock outcroppings in showers of sparks and dust. The valley boomed with the echo of outgoing rounds. Vega took those echoes and folded herself into them. She sprinted from behind her rock, keeping low, feet barely touching the ground. Rounds cracked overhead, some theirs, some enemy. The world blurred at the edges, focused on the dark cut in the valley wall ahead. The valley had closed its teeth around them. She was on a climb out through the gums. The impossible climb. The drainage cut was narrower than it had looked from the road. Up close, it was a jagged wound in the rock, barely wide enough for a person in gear to squeeze through in places. Vega hit its mouth at a controlled run and ducked into its shadow, the immediate relief of being out of the direct lines of fire tempered by the knowledge that this was just another kind of trap. Sound changed in there. The valley's roar became a muted, distant thunder, like a storm heard from inside a long hallway. Dust hung in the air, catching stray light from the burning vehicles below and turning it into a faint, murky glow. Vega's boots slid on loose scree. She caught herself on one hand against the wall, fingers scraping over rough stone. She moved forward, every step a careful calculation between speed and silence. Her handheld radio crackled faintly at her shoulder, fighting against the jammer's remaining influence. Bits of Rourke's voice bled through. Right flank, watch those mortars still. But the words weren't clear enough to act on. It didn't matter. She already knew their situation, pinned, bleeding, counting magazines. The cut steepened quickly, becoming more of a climb than a walk. Random rocks, jutting from the walls, became handholds. She slung her rifle across her back, muzzle down, sling snug across her chest to keep it tight. Her gloved hands groped for grips in the dimness. Loose stones shifted under her boots. Each slide sent a small cascade of pebbles down behind her, a whispering rain that sounded thunderous in her ears. She clenched her jaw and forced her breathing to stay slow, controlled. Halfway up, the darkness exploded into harsh white. An illumination round popped overhead outside the cut, its bright flare turning night into day for a few brutal seconds. Light washed into the canyon, searing her night-adjusted eyes through the cut's narrow opening. She froze instinctively, pressing herself flat against the rock. Outside, she heard enemy voices bark in a language she only partially understood, boots scuffing, the clatter of weapons as fighters repositioned to take advantage of the temporary visibility. A beam of light swept past the mouth of the cut, one of their handheld spotlights mounted on a makeshift bracket. It passed just meters below her, the white glow reflecting off dust motes in the air like floating snow. If she moved now, any falling rocks or her own silhouette would jump out in that unnatural brightness. So she became stone. Her fingers dug into a crack. Her toes found precarious purchase on a narrow ledge. Her chest burned with the need to inhale deeper, but she forced herself to take slow, shallow breaths, ribs expanding only as much as they had to. The flare hissed overhead, burning itself out. When it died, the valley plunged back into comparative darkness, the sudden absence of light almost as jarring as its arrival. The spotlights moved on, searching elsewhere. Vega counted to 10 in her head, then 10 again, before forcing herself to resume the climb. The cut widened slightly around a bend, then opened into a tiny ledge carved into the rock, no bigger than the floor space of a small table. Nestled into the wall above, it was a crude fighting position. 2 men, one sitting with his back to the rock, the other leaning on his rifle, both watching the valley below through gaps. Vega flattened herself against the opposite wall, just above their eye line. From here, she could hear them clearly. Their voices were low, almost casual. "Get the cameras ready when they break," one said, laughing under his breath. "Commander wants this one perfect," the other replied. "No more shaky phone videos. He wants the Americans to see their faces when they realize." Vega felt a cold knot tighten in her gut. Cameras, not just a kill. They wanted to show. Her fingers tightened on the rock. She could lean out, double-tap them both before they could react. 2 fewer guns. 2 fewer spotters. But the angles, the dust, the timing, any shot risked a flash, a noise that would echo weirdly up the cut. They were too close to the valley floor for her muzzle blast to blend entirely into the chaos. The hunter's instinct in her screamed to eliminate them. The strategist assessing the higher ground screamed louder to stay invisible. She swallowed that instinct down. The moral weight of leaving enemies alive behind her knotted her chest, but she shouldered it anyway. She climbed past them. Higher, the cut narrowed again, then abruptly steepened. It was no longer a steep path. It was almost a wall. Jagged protrusions offer handholds, but not many. She slung the rifle further back, securing it with a second strap to keep it from swinging and unbalancing her. Her gloves scraped as she pulled herself up, one hand at a time, one boot at a time. Her muscles burned. Her lungs fought the thin, dusty air. She didn't let herself look down. Wind funneled through the cut, carrying with it the smell of smoke from below. It drifted past her in thick curls, making her eyes water. Her NVGs were up now. There was no point in using them with so little ambient light, but the smoke still made everything smear and blur. At one point, her right boot slipped. A fist-sized rock tumbled away, clattering down the cut like a dropped grenade. The noise made her heart hammer against her ribs. Voices rose below. Someone shouted. A burst of blind fire rattled up toward the cut, bullets whining off stone, chips raining around her hands. She pressed herself into the wall, trying to find any hollow that would make her smaller. Tiny fragments stung her face, nicking skin under the paint. Then the firing stopped, replaced by nervous laughter and muttered curses. They hadn't seen her. They just shot at noise at a ghost. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and continued upward, more careful now, each hand placement deliberate, each foothold tested twice before trusting her way to it. The higher she climbed, the thicker the smoke became. It rolled along the rock like a living thing, rising from the burning vehicles below. It turned the air into a shifting gray mass that distorted depth and made the cliff feel like it was moving under her hands. She used it anyway. If they couldn't see clearly through the smoke, neither could she, but also meant her silhouette would be smudged, blurred, even if someone happened to glance up with night optics. Finally, the cut opened up again. She dragged herself over a lip of rock and collapsed onto a narrow shelf, chest heaving. The shelf was only a meter or two wide, but it ran along the cliff for several meters, following the curve of the valley like a balcony clinging to the inside of a bowl. From here, the view snapped into brutal clarity. The valley floor lay below, a chaotic tableau of burning vehicles, frantic movement, and flickering muzzle flashes. The seals were pinned in a strip of broken rock near the center. Their fire, though accurate, was constrained, their arcs limited by the cover they'd been forced to hide behind. Enemy positions dotted the ridges on both sides. Machine gun nests in carved recesses, small teams behind improvised barricades. The mortar pit Vega had heard thumping was further up the opposite slope, tucked behind a natural fold in the terrain and partially camouflaged. Beyond the relay hut, the antenna truck glowed faintly in her view. Figures moved around its back, one of them adjusting something on a console inside the truck's open door. Cables ran from the truck to the hut and to a series of small, square devices mounted on tripods. The reinforced shack sat beside it, dark and ominous, like a sealed box waiting for its contents. Vega swallowed and rolled onto her stomach. She pulled her rifle around, nestling it into a shallow depression in the rock in front of her. Her body fell into a familiar shape, legs splayed slightly, non-firing hand adjusting the stock length, cheek pressed to the comb. She peered through her primary optic. The cracked glass skewed the image, splitting the edges of the reticle into faint, ghostly doubles. At the center, though, it was still clear enough. The damage had turned her scope into something finicky, not useless. She used it to spot, to refine ranges, to confirm targets. Then she rolled the rifle slightly and brought the canted mini-optic into alignment. Its simple dot hovered over her view, less magnification, less precision, but enough to make hits if she did her part. Hybrid solution. Improvise, adapt, survive. She let her breathing slow, in and out, counting the beats between heartbeats. The valley's chaos hummed at the edges of her attention, but she pushed it away, narrowing her world to arcs and priorities. PCAM first. Drone, if another appeared. Mortars. Jammer. Leaders. And somewhere in that chain, the men guarding that shack and whatever nightmare waited inside it. Vega to Rourke. She whispered into her handheld, not expecting much. Static answered her, but this time, under the hiss, she thought she heard something else. A faint opening, like the edge of a door cracking. She adjusted the small antenna on the radio, angling it upward and slightly toward the valley. Vega, East Ridge. In position, she said, enunciating each word slowly, clearly. Targets in sight. The jammer still clawed at the frequency, but a sliver of her transmission might get through. Enough for them to understand that the ghost on the ridge wasn't a ghost at all. She settled in behind her rifle, the rock cool and unyielding under her chest. Below, the valley ground on, an enormous mouth chewing on steel and flesh. Above, Vega laid out her kill ladder in her head and prepared to start breaking teeth. Angles of silence, the kill ladder. From the shelf, the battlefield became a board. Not a clean one, not a sterile academic exercise with neat squares and predictable moves, but a board nonetheless. Every muzzle flash was a piece. Every shadow behind a rock, every subtle shift of fire a clue. Vega started at the top. Enemy sniper overwatch. She scanned the opposite cliff, high and to the west. There on a small balcony, chipped into the stone, she saw him. Long rifle, scope glinting faintly even through NVGs. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who believed he owned the skyline. Every time a SEAL shifted position below, he adjusted his aim, tracking smoothly, waiting for someone to expose more than a helmet or a shoulder. Her primary optic gave her a clear view despite the damage. She watched his breathing pattern, the way his chest rose and fell. She saw the slight tension in his trigger finger, the unconscious curl as he prepared to take his neck shot. She exhaled, rolled to the canted optic, and let the dot settle just beneath his eye line. The valley noise faded for a heartbeat. Her finger moved, smooth and steady. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The enemy sniper's head snapped back, then forward. Then he crumpled sideways out of his position, his rifle clattering against the rock before dropping into the darkness below. First piece removed. She didn't watch him fall. She was already shifting. Next, heavy machine gun that had pinned Rourke's right flank. She traced the sound back to a cutout on the eastern wall, slightly lower than her position. The PCAM's barrel jutted from a slit in a stone and sandbag structure, spitting long chains of fire. Two men worked it, the gunner and his assistant, their faces smeared with sweat and dust. Through the cracked primary optic, their outline wobbled at the edges but sharpened enough at the center. She gauged distance, wind, negligible at this range given the confined canyon. Her mind performed the calculations it had rehearsed 1,000 times on calmer ranges. She breathed in, out, pressed the trigger. The gunner jerked as the round hit, his hands flying up from the weapon. The PCAM's next burst never came. The belt sagged, dangling. The assistant reached for the grip, eyes wide, trying to drag the weapon back into operation. Vega had already cycled another round. The second shot took him just as his fingers closed on the stock. He dropped, tumbling onto the sandbags, then slid down out of sight. Below, the difference was immediate. The eastern side of the kill zone's fire thinned. The arcs of incoming rounds shifted, suddenly less precise, as other fighters tried to compensate for the loss of that anchor gun. Rourke saw it, even if he didn't know exactly what had caused it. "Right side PKM is cold," he shouted. "Push some fire up there. Keep him off balance." The SEALs obeyed, funneling more rounds into the now silent nest. It kept other fighters from rushing to reman the gun, buying more seconds. Seconds were life. Vega's I moved up slope. The mortar pit was harder to spot. It hid behind a fold in the terrain. Only the faint flashes of propellant and the silhouettes of men moving against the smoke gave it away. She zoomed in with the cracked scope, watching the rhythm. One man dropping rounds into the tube, another adjusting elevation, a third calling corrections, his hand on a small notebook or tablet. She picked that third man. He was the brain. The others were muscle. She watched his mouth move as he shouted numbers, his hand flicking from page to page. When he leaned slightly forward to check the fall of the next round through his own small optic, she took him. Her shot hit him just below the cheekbone. His head snapped sideways, and he went down like a cut string. The loader froze for a second, then reached for the next round. The man on the elevation dial looked confused, hands still on the crank. The carefully synchronized team became 3 individuals, each reacting on instinct instead of training. Fortunately for Vega and the SEALs below, enemy instinct was slower than enemy planning. Her second shot punched through the loader's shoulder, spinning him away from the tube. He screamed, clutching at bone and blood. She let them keep screaming. Fear was a force multiplier too, if you placed it in the right spot. Below her, return fire from the enemy faltered in places. Fighters called to one another, voices tinged with something that hadn't been present at the beginning of the ambush: uncertainty. The enemy commander adapted quickly. She saw him near the antenna truck, standing with a radio handset pressed to his ear, gesturing sharply at the ridges. He wore cleaner gear than most of his men, his vest more organized, his weapon held with the easy familiarity of someone who had spent years in combat rather than weeks. He pointed up toward the ridges, then jabbed the air in an arc that traced suspiciously close to her position. "Find them," he must have been saying. "Find whoever is cutting our guns away." From her vantage, she watched as small teams of fighters broke off from their positions. 2 climbers started up a narrow goat path leading toward the eastern ridgeline. Others scanned higher, raising optics, trying to spot the ghost that had started dismantling their carefully built machine. And then, as if to help them, a new drone took to the air. This one was slightly larger than the previous quadcopter, its shape heavier in her optic. It climbed with purpose, nose dipping and lifting as its controller adjusted its flight path. An IR camera hung beneath it, its lens a dark eye. It wasn't just going to hover above the valley floor. It was heading for the ridges. "Of course," Vega murmured. "You adapt too." She watched it drift closer to her shelf, turning slowly as it searched for hot spots against the cooler rock. Her body glowed like a flare in its camera, a lone human-shaped heat signature where no one should be. She had limited options. Shooting it too early meant giving them more time to triangulate her position from the muzzle flash and sound. Waiting too long meant it spotting her first and handing them an exact grid. She waited until it banked slightly, presenting the thin profile of its battery compartment as it moved across her view. She could hear faintly the whine of its rotors even up here, a mechanical mosquito probing around the edges of her hide. She inhaled, exhaled, and took the shot. The rifle cracked, quieter with the suppressor, but not silent. The round punched through the drone's underbelly. One rotor exploded off its mount in a spray of plastic and metal. The others spasmed, fighting physics for a hopeless second before the whole craft tumbled. It fell past her position in a spiraling blur, hitting a protruding rock and shattering, pieces bouncing down the slope. Below, shouts rose. Fighters pointed, traced the drone's fall back up the way it had come. They didn't know exactly where she was, but they had a cone, a sector. It was enough. Small arms fire erupted toward her general area. Bullets slammed into the rock above and below her shelf, some hitting close enough to shower her with stone fragments. One round struck so near that she felt the shock through her forearm, like someone had hit the rock with a hammer. Then came the RPG. The telltale backblast flare on the opposite ridge gave her half a second of warning, enough to duck her head and pull her limbs in tight as if bracing for a wave. The RPG slammed into the cliff a few meters from her hide and detonated with a deafening crack. The blast shook the shelf like an earthquake. Shards of rock tore through the space she'd occupied moments before. One jagged piece grazed her shoulder, ripping through fabric and skin, a hot line of pain. For a terrifying instant, the shelf seemed to tilt, pebbles and dust sliding under her. Her stomach lurched with the feeling of almost falling into the yawning black below. Then it settled. Barely. The rock held. For now. Her ears rang. Her shoulder burned. She tasted blood. She forced herself to move anyway. Relocate, she whispered to herself, an old lesson from sniper school beating louder than the panic in her veins. Shoot, move, shoot. She crawled sideways along the shelf, hugging the cliff, body pressed flat. The rock under her palms was hot and gritty, sticky with her own blood in places. She moved until she reached a small bulge in the cliff that gave her a new angle. From here, the lines were even better. The antenna truck's profile opened up, the jammer mast rising from its bed like a man-made tree. She could see the devices on tripods more clearly now, small, boxy, their indicator lights steady. Between bursts of pain from her shoulder, she rolled to her belly again and brought the rifle up. Jammer crew next. She spotted two men working near the truck, one leaning into the open rear door, adjusting some settings, the other scanning with binoculars, likely talking to someone on a separate net. Their posture screamed importance more than their weapons did. She took the one in the doorway first. The shot hit him in the upper back, pitching him forward into the truck. His body collapsed onto whatever equipment sat inside, hitting switches and panels in a clumsy, lethal dance. Sparks flickered. The second man turned, shouting, reaching for his own radio. Vega's next round caught him in the chest, dropping him beside the truck's rear tire. She shifted her aim slightly without firing. Waiting. A heartbeat later, one of the jammer boxes on its tripod flickered. Its indicator light went from steady to erratic, then died. A faint, oscillating hum that had been present in the background of her world. The sound she hadn't realized she'd been hearing until it shifted, wavered, and faded. On the valley floor, Singh's spare radio, the one he'd been keeping mostly out of habit now, suddenly cleared. Ghost One, say again. Ghost One, this is Highland. Reading you weak, but readable. What is your status? The forward base's voice came through in ragged pieces over the net. Singh stared at the speaker on his chest in disbelief. Then he keyed the mic with a bloody hand. Highland, this is Ghost One, he rasped. We're pinned in the valley. Ambush. Multiple casualties. Enemy forces with coordinated IEDs, mortars, jamming, and overwatch. Jamming is intermittent. Say again, intermittent. The response was garbled, but hopeful. They had a line now. Not stable, not strong, but a lifeline. Rourke heard it too. He snapped his head towards Singh. Tell them we're working a flank from above, he ordered. Tell them we don't know how long it holds. We need extraction options and any air they can spare outside the canyon mouth. Singh relayed as best he could, voice cutting in and out. Above, Vega moved down her target ladder. With the jammer compromised, their static shrank. Enemy transmissions probably flickered too. Confusion spread like cracks in glass. She turned her attention to the squad leaders. They stood out in the night by behavior more than gear. They were the ones pointing, shouting, grabbing shoulders, dragging fighters to new firing points when old ones became ineffective. Many wore headsets or carried larger radios. She picked one along the western ridge, his silhouette distinctive as he leaned over a subordinate, gesturing aggressively downslope. Her shot folded him. Another, across the valley, running between positions with a handset pressed to his ear. She caught him in mid-stride, his forward momentum turning into a graceless tumble. Each taken leader translated into a hitch in the enemy's firing rhythm. Instead of a coordinated storm, incoming fire began to come in clumps, frantic and unsynchronized. Some positions kept firing at where the SEALs had been, not where they were moving. Others went quiet altogether as fighters ducked, waiting for instructions that weren't coming. The enemy commander saw the shift. He left the relative safety of the truck and moved toward the base of the eastern goat path, shouting up at the climbers already making their way toward Vega's old position. He waved them forward, then started up the path himself, rifle slung, determination in every step. He wasn't going to let his carefully crafted trap collapse without a fight. He was going to kill the ghost on the ridge personally if he had to. Vega tracked him through the cracked optic, watching the way his shoulders rolled as he climbed, the way his hand stayed near his radio, even now. He was a node, a brain, and a spine all at once. Below her, Rourke seized the opening Vega had carved. "All smoke out," he ordered. "We move on my go. Buddy carries on the wounded. Drag anyone you can't carry. We push to that spur." He pointed toward a jagged outcrop on the west side, a sliver of terrain that might offer them a route up and around the kill zone's worst choke points. Hughes yanked pins from smoke grenades and hurled them. Thick plumes of colored smoke erupted, mingling with the already choking dust. The valley floor became a swirling maelstrom of obscured shapes. Under that cover, the SEALs moved. They lifted wounded men over shoulders, dragged others by their vests, weapons slung in awkward, necessary positions. They bounded from rock to rock, using the thinning enemy fire and Vega's continuing shots to slip through gaps. Vega watched them go, a dissonant mix of relief and urgency churning in her chest. She had a handful of rounds left in her current magazine, enough for the next critical shots. Maybe not enough for everything she wanted to do. The enemy commander had reached a narrow switchback on the goat path, Hunter team close behind him. From there, he was partially shielded from the valley, but exposed from her angle. He paused, raising his radio, likely shouting at someone still at the truck. She saw the muscles in his neck tense, the way his jaw clenched. She wondered for half a second if he understood what was happening, that the same geometry he had used to trap them was now being used to dismantle his force. She centered her reticle. This was the turning point. Kill him, and the brittle cohesion of his fighters would shatter. She let out a breath and took the shot. The round crossed the valley in less than a blink. It punched into his chest just below the collarbone, exiting out his back in a spray that the darkness and distance thankfully blurred. He staggered, eyes wide, clutching at the wound as if he could stuff the life back in. He toppled backward down the narrow path, colliding with one of his own climbers. Both men went down in a tangled mess. The Hunter team scrambled, suddenly leaderless and under fire from a direction they couldn't even pinpoint. On the valley floor, the change was immediate and profound. Enemy fire, already ragged, fractured completely. Some fighters, seeing their commander fall, poured wild, undisciplined bursts at the ridges, burning through magazines without adjustment or purpose. Others broke and ran, retreating toward the relay hut and the reinforced shack. A few, either brave or too entrenched to move, stayed in place, firing sporadically. The carefully tuned instrument had become a noisy, panicked mob. Rourke's team burst from their original cover as a unit, smoke swirling around them. They moved in bounds, one group covering while another sprinted with the wounded. Bullets still snapped around them, still dangerous, still lethal, but fewer, less accurate. They reached the rock spur in a rush of pounding boots and ragged breaths. From there, they found a narrow game trail, barely wide enough for 2 men abreast, leading up and out toward the valley's rim. As they climbed, one of the younger SEALs glanced back into the canyon. Through the shifting smoke, he caught a glimpse of a small figure on a high shelf, rifle flashing occasionally. A ghost on the ridge. He grinned, teeth white in the green glow of his NVGs, and turned back to the climb, dragging a wounded teammate higher. Meanwhile, the enemy fighters guarding the reinforced shack tightened their perimeter. Even as their comrades faltered and fled, those men stayed. They repositioned behind barricades of ammo crates and sandbags, weapons aimed not at the retreating SEALs, but at the valley's mouth, as if expecting someone, or something, new to arrive. Vega crawled along her shelf again, moving away from the spot the RPG had nearly turned into dust. Her shoulder throbbed with every pull, blood soaking in her sleeve and drying tacky. She reached a new notch in the rock and settled in for what might be her last few shots. Her magazine felt light. She did a quick mental count, lips moving soundlessly. Enough rounds to cover the team's movement up the spur, and maybe, to reach out and disrupt whatever nightmare was anchored in that shack. Her radio crackled at her shoulder, clearer now. "Jay, this is Rourke." Came through, broken but more recognizable than before. "We're moving up the spur. Casualties aboard. You still on station?" She smiled despite the pain. "Still here," she whispered, knowing he might not hear. "Just changing the mission parameters a bit." Below, the valley smoldered, the kill box undone, but not yet fully escaped. Vega put her eye to the cracked glass one more time and decided where the last of her bullets would go. Debrief in the dark hangar. The hangar smelled like jet fuel, antiseptic, and the metallic tang of dry blood. Hours had sanded the sharpest edges off the night, but hadn't erased them. The SEALs sat on folding cots and makeshift stretchers, bandages bright white against sunburnt skin, for bags hanging from hastily rigged hooks. The bullet-riddled helicopter that had brought them back squatted nearby, mechanics already swarming it, pointing at holes and shaking their heads. The overhead lights were dim. It felt like a chapel built for machines. At a folding table near the center, an intel officer clicked a laptop awake. The screen cast a pale rectangle of light onto his face, hollowing his cheeks. Beside him, an external drive and a stack of evidence bags sat labeled and sealed. Rourke stood with one hand on his side, fingers pressed through his shirt to the bandage underneath. He looked older than he had at the start of the mission, somehow. Not in years, those had already been carved into him before this, but in weight. Vega leaned against a support beam a few meters away, out of the main circle of light. Her arm was wrapped, shoulder immobilized in a sling for now. She wasn't supposed to be on her feet. No one had had the energy to argue with her about it. "All right," the intel officer said softly, glancing around at the gathered men. "You deserve to know what we found." He tapped a key. Images flickered onto the screen. A small room, concrete walls, ugly in its simplicity. Cameras mounted at multiple angles. Restraints bolted to the floor and a central post. A metal table with stains that might have been rust once. Hughes looked away, jaw tightening. In the reinforced shack, the intel officer said, "We found a fully equipped studio. Multi-angle cameras. Lighting rigs. The works. They've been filming executions here. Not just quick, messy things. Carefully staged productions. Message pieces." He clicked, and a schematic appeared. "This," he continued, "is the layout of the antenna truck we captured. It's not just a relay. It's a harvesting station. They were set up to strip encrypted comms gear from any captives, crack what they could, and use the rest in their own ambush network." He looked up, eyes tired but steady. This valley wasn't just a random ambush site. It was a proving ground, a place to test how you respond, to see what works, to refine their timings. They lure teams like yours in with low-risk targets, kill or capture as many as they can, and learn from every run. Rourke's mouth pressed into a line. "So, somebody fed us just enough truth to walk us into their experiment," he said. "Looks that way," the intel officer said. "We're working on where the bad intel came from. Could be compromised local sources. Could be deliberate manipulation of our own analysts. We'll find out." He hesitated, then added, "If that jammer had stayed up and whoever was running the cameras had gotten a live SEAL into that room, they'd have had a piece of propaganda that would have played in every corner of the region by next week." There was a moment of silence as that sank in. Instead, the officer said, "We've got their hard drives, their protocols, and the coordinates of every other valley they checked for this same geometry." He looked around. "And we've still got you." Eyes drifted, almost as one, toward the edge of the group where Vega stood. She stared at the laptop screen for a long moment, then away, her jaw working. "The ambush geometry," she said quietly, more to Rourke than anyone else. It was the same. He turned toward her. "Same as what?" She reached into the pocket of her cargo pants with her good hand and pulled out the old patch she'd been looking at before the mission. She tossed it lightly onto the table. It skidded to a stop near the laptop. Different unit insignia. Different colors. Same country's flag in the corner. Mountain Pass, 3 years ago, she said. We had intel that said low-risk route. Single road. High walls. Sound familiar? We drove in. The first truck hit an IED. Last truck hit a second one. Jamming came up. Mortars bracketed us. PKMs on both sides. She swallowed. My spotter took a round through the throat in the first 30 seconds, she went on. Ramirez. Couldn't get him out. Couldn't get air in. Couldn't get anything but static on the net. We lost half the unit before someone found a way to crawl up a goat path and knock out a few guns. They didn't stick around to fight it out that time. They just took what gear they could and left. She nodded at the shack on the screen. We didn't know they were building a studio back then, she said. We just knew they were getting better. The hangar seemed smaller for a second, the weight of that earlier failure pressing in. Since then, she said, I've looked for that pattern in every map, every satellite image. Any route that looks too clean. Any valley that narrows just right. I've been the annoying one in the briefings, the one who says, hey, maybe we shouldn't drive our entire combat power into this convenient little pipe. Her gaze slid to Rourke, but there was no accusation in it now. Just tired acknowledgement. Today, we did it anyway, she said. And they were ready. Cameras and all. Rourke let out a slow breath. And you climbed out of it. She blinked, as if the way he framed it hadn't occurred to her. I climbed, she said. Somehow didn't fall. Took some shots. Got lucky a few times. Luck, Hughes said from his cot, voice hoarse. Luck doesn't ladder targets like that. Luck doesn't kill their sniper, their PKM, their mortars, their jammer, and their commander in a sequence that happens to open exactly the door we needed. He shifted, wincing, and looked at Rourke. She was the door, Chief. Rourke straightened slowly, the movement tugging at his wound. In the report, he said, we'll write what happened. We'll note an unidentified sniper element on the East Ridge engaged enemy positions. His lips twisted in a wry half-smile. We'll mention that against orders, an operator broke from the main element and took a position that doctrine doesn't exactly recommend. Murmurs. A few smiles. The unsaid truth. Doctrine had almost gotten them killed. But in here, he went on, tapping his temple, and in here, he tapped his chest. We know what went down. He looked directly at Vega. Overwatch from nowhere, he said. Ghost on the ridge. Whatever you want to call it. Without you, we're hard driving that shack and a headline on their feeds. A subtle murmur of assent ran through the group. It wasn't the whooping, backslapping cheer they might have given after a clean, easy win. It was something quieter, heavier. Respect with edges. Vega shifted her weight, suddenly unsure what to do with the attention. She hadn't climbed that wall for praise. She'd done it because she couldn't live with watching the same mistake kill another team. Officially, the intel officer said, closing the laptop, the climb will get a line or two. Command doesn't love it when people freelance, especially when it works better than the plan. Officially, Rourke echoed, a lot of things will be tidy. He paused. Unofficially, every one of us here knows whose name goes on that ridge. Someone snorted softly. It's Vega's ridge now. Could have been her graveyard. Another muttered, not unkindly. Vega pushed off the beam. I'm going to get some air, she said, half to the group, half to herself. As she walked toward the hangar's open door, one of the younger SEALs, Hughes, arms still in a sling from his own shrapnel wounds, hopped down from his cot and caught up with her, moving a little stiffly. Hey, he called. Vega. She turned, pausing near the threshold where the cool night air lapped at the hangar's stale atmosphere. What did you see up there? He asked. I mean, what made you go anyway? After everyone told you to ride it out with the rest of us. She thought about that for a moment. She could talk about the patch, about Ramirez, about that first ambush and the nightmares that came with it. She could talk about geometry and angles and target ladders. Instead, she shrugged one shoulder, the uninjured one, and met his eyes. I saw the same mistake twice, she said, and I figured the second time, maybe I should do something about it. Hughes absorbed that, then nodded slowly. Glad you did. So am I, she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. She stepped out into the night. The base spread out before her, a grid of low buildings and high fences under the oppressive, comforting hum of generators and distant aircraft. The sky above was clear now, stars hard and sharp, indifferent to the day's events. Off to one side, a helicopter spun up, rotors thudding as ground crew cleared away chocks. Another mission loading. Another team heading out into the dark, following another set of lines on another map. A floodlight beside the hangar flared to life, casting her in sudden relief. For a moment, her shadow stretched long across the tarmac, rifle sling crossing her chest, bandage stark white against her arm. She reached into her pocket and felt the edge of the old patch, the fabric rough under her fingers. She thought of Ramirez, of the valleys he never got to climb out of the men in this hangar who would, because she had refused to let the same story play out unchanged. Behind her, voices rose and fell. Reports would be written, debriefs held, intel chased. Somewhere in those documents, there would be a line about unauthorized action, another about adaptability, maybe a commendation tucked between bureaucratic caveats. None of it mattered as much as the simple fact that they were alive to write them. She looked once more toward the dark horizon where the valley lay, invisible but not forgotten. They said the mission was over, she murmured to herself. The memory of Rourke's voice in that moment in the canyon was still fresh. The surrender baked into it. The resolve, too. Vega adjusted the strap on her sling, squared her shoulders, and started walking toward the far end of the tarmac, where the noise of the spinning rotors grew louder. She just changed what the mission was, she finished quietly. The wind snatched the words and carried them away, out over the base, over the deserts and valleys beyond, toward the ridge where smoke still clung to stone and bullet scars marked the place where one underestimated sniper had refused to let a kill box close a second time.